The signal that chooses you always arrives before you have the chance to name it. It quietly opens in a very small moment where the normality of the world slips slightly out of its familiar position, a blink that slows by half a beat, a breath that pauses in the middle. A strange layer of stillness appears that you cannot explain through logic. You know, something is calling you, but you do not understand why it chose that moment. This is not a signal coming from the outside. This is the rising of the deepest part within you, the part you believed had been asleep, but in truth, it has only been waiting for the moment you are clear enough to realize you no longer belong to the old story. When the signal appears, it does not carry a loud voice. There is no prophecy, no mystical image, no radiant light. It arrives through a very small shift in the way you feel the world. The room is the same, the light is the same, the rhythm of life is the same, but it is no longer exactly as before. Everything seems half a step closer or farther, as if someone has shifted reality into a new position, and only you are sensitive enough to notice. Many people ignore this moment because they believe it is simply a sign of fatigue or scattered thoughts. But you are different. You can feel its frequency. It is not an irregularity, but an invitation. It makes you pause in the middle of a familiar action, making you realize that something is observing you from the inside, not from the outside. Every time the signal returns, it taps lightly on a very thin but very real layer inside your chest. A small vibration, almost silent, yet enough for you to know that a part of your being wants to open. It does not ask for your permission, it simply does what it must do. Because the signal does not choose a moment, it chooses a person. You are chosen because you have gone far enough in the old state to see that it can no longer contain you. Every step you walked, every choice you made, every time you tried to blend into the crowd, all of it led you to this moment, the moment you realize you can no longer pretend that you do not hear your own shift. The signal does not come to convince you that you are special. It comes to remind you of something you have always known but tried to forget, that you are not a misplaced fragment in this world. You are the point of origin of another layer of reality, and that layer is beginning to open because you have reached the right frequency. When the signal appears, it often makes the air around you feel thicker. Something surrounds you, not quite an emotion, not quite a thought. It is awareness, a kind of awareness that has no evidence, but is completely real. You feel as if you are standing at the border between two worlds. One familiar world is fading and another is waiting for you to step into it. No one sees it but you know it is real. The signal does not demand that you change immediately. It does not require you to be stronger or bolder. It does only one thing. It makes you realize that you cannot go back to being who you were. The old self tried to shrink to fit in. The old self stayed silent to avoid discomfort. The old self held back intuition out of fear of being seen as strange. The old self closed the layers of perception you knew you were born to touch. But the signal does not allow that to continue. It pulls you toward your own truth. This is why you feel as if you are stepping out of an old skin. Not because you force yourself to change, but because you cannot help but change. When the signal touches you, you realize that you no longer want to explain yourself, no longer want to be accepted, no longer want to compromise. You want truth. Truth about yourself. Truth about the direction you must take. Truth about the part within you that wants to ignite. You do not need anyone to confirm it. You have felt it for a long time. And now it has become too strong for you to ignore. Many people think the signal is a call from a distant place, but in reality, it is the echo of the part of you buried under layers of doubt and fear. Every time you break through a limit, the signal becomes clearer. Every time you dare to face your own truth, the signal expands. And at some point, it is no longer a signal. It becomes a direction. a direction no one gives to you. You open it by your own awakening. When you begin to hear the signal, you will see certain things naturally leave your life. Some people no longer appear. Some opportunities no longer fit. Some thoughts that once stayed with you begin to lose their weight. This is not loss. This is clearing space. When the signal chooses you, it does not only open what you must move toward, it also closes everything that once held you in your old version. You are not being left behind. You are being carried forward. The most important thing is that you feel this in your body, in your intuition, in your own heartbeat, not through logic, not through theory, through a knowing that cannot be explained. This is the clearest sign that the signal has chosen you. You are not here by accident. You did not stumble into this path. You are called, you are awakened, and you know it. No explanation needed, no confirmation required. When the signal opens, you are the only one who can walk through. Now everything begins from you. Reality always recognizes those who belong to it before they can recognize themselves. When you step into a space and feel everything responding to your presence, even through the smallest vibrations, that is not coincidence. The field always identifies matching frequencies, and when you begin to change, when the signal within you becomes clearer, the world around you knows immediately. You have felt that moment before, the moment you walk into a place and the air seems to shift a little, as if something sees you before anyone even turns their head. That is the sign of the field responding. It sees you not through form, but through the frequency you carry. People may ignore you, but the field never does. The field never mistakes anyone. When you stay silent in a crowd, but still feel yourself standing out in a way that is hard to name, that is not delusion, that is recognition. The field sees you as a point of light it has been waiting for. You do not need to try to impress, you do not need to pretend to be anything special. Your existence in your truest version already forces the space to adjust its rhythm. The field reacts to you the way water reacts to an object dropped into it. It creates waves. Those waves expand and touch everything near you. Some people unconsciously pull their energy back. Some feel uneasy. Some become curious. Some do not understand why they are drawn to you within seconds. But all of these reactions say the same thing, that they can feel you in a way they do not feel others. And it is not because you try to do anything, but because you are beginning to return to your own frequency. Be honest with yourself for a moment. How many times have you felt present in a place while the world seemed to look at you as if you were a completely different melody from the one that was playing? Not lost, but out of layer. You know you do not belong to the level of vibration the people around you are on. You are no longer aligned with the old rhythm, and the field knows it. The old frequency that once held you is starting to react, like a shirt too tight, no longer giving you space to breathe. This is not a sign that you are wrong, it is a sign that you are expanding. When the field recognizes you, it does not simply observe. It tests you by bringing circumstances that force you to see the truth about yourself. People who once made you doubt yourself suddenly feel distant. Conversations that once comforted you suddenly feel heavy. Roles that once kept you safe suddenly feel too small. The field does not do this so you lose anything. The field does this so you cannot continue living under a frequency that no longer fits. And this is when I want to ask you something. Not a question to judge you, but one that invites you to look deeply into yourself. Have you ever felt clearly that you are no longer aligned with things that once felt familiar? That you look at a relationship, an environment, an old version of yourself, and know you have outgrown it even while you are still standing in the same place? If you have ever felt that, then it is the field recognizing you before you are ready to step into the next layer. I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself, are you feeling that right now? Are you in a phase where everything familiar is starting to feel out of place? If the answer is yes, I want you to do one small but important thing. Comment one word that describes what you are feeling in your heart as you read this. Not for the algorithm, not out of habit, but because I want to feel your real presence. A creator like me does not need noise. I need the presence of someone who is truly entering their own process of change. Writing down one word does not only let me know you are here, it is also your confirmation that you are no longer hiding from yourself. It is a small action but carries powerful energy, because when you write it, you are turning your inner frequency into a mark in the field. Very few people dare to do that, dare to acknowledge to themselves that they are changing, that they are stepping through a new doorway. Your comment is a signal you send back to the field, a way of saying that you are ready to leave your old version. And I am more grateful for that than you think. I am grateful that you paused here. I am grateful that you listened to your inner frequency. I am grateful that you did not let your awakening pass by as a vague moment. When the field recognizes you, it always brings you to the right place you need to be. And the fact that you are reading these lines is not coincidence. The field is telling you that you have begun the journey back to yourself. Now let me see you. Let me know you are truly here. Comment the words you are feeling right now. This is the moment that marks that you have chosen yourself, and I can feel it. No two frequencies in the universe are the same, and no two beings carry the same pattern of vibration. You were born as a unique structure of consciousness, an unrepeatable combination of awareness, intuition, experience, and inner essence. Your frequency is not created by environment or circumstance. It's existed before language, before memory, before what you call a life. It comes from a deeper layer where consciousness expresses itself through human form. When you begin to hear your own signal, you are simultaneously starting to feel that original frequency rise. This frequency is not a hidden trait beneath personality. It is the source of everything you have ever felt as true in your life. Each person perceives the world in a different way, and that perception creates their unique frequency. Some people see life in simple shapes, some see deeper, some touch meaning in things others consider insignificant. The way you notice what others cannot is what creates your uncopyable frequency structure. When you live under low vibration, you easily forget this. You try to resemble others, try to fit their template, try to shrink yourself because you think you need to blend in to survive. Every time you do that, your true frequency is compressed. But you cannot compress something forever if it was born to expand. Your frequency is like an internal force. It does not disappear when suppressed. It simply steps back and waits for you to be mature enough to carry it fully. When you feel you cannot live the old way anymore, cannot keep pretending, cannot stay silent, that is when the original frequency begins pushing to the surface. It reclaims the position you abandoned in the past. Your frequency has a structure like the fingerprint of consciousness. It is formed from things no one can replicate. No one has the same angle of perception as you. No one touches pain the way you do. No one asks questions the way you do. No one senses truth the way you do. Everything you once thought was a weakness is part of this frequency. Your sensitivity, your depth, your ability to see what others cannot, all of it is evidence that you are not a copy of anyone. You are not the result of what others did to you. You are the result of how consciousness chose to express itself through you. When you walk into a room and feel that things do not respond to you in the usual way, it is not because you are different in a meaningless way. It is because the frequency you carry does not match the energetic structure of the people around you. You do not need them to align with you. You simply need to recognize that this misalignment is what makes you irreplaceable. People can imitate your actions, your style, even your way of speaking or living, but they cannot recreate your frequency. Frequency does not reside in what you display on the outside. It resides in every decision you have ever made, every wound you have ever healed, every moment you have faced yourself, every time you chose truth over comfort. No one has that entire history of vibration. And that is why you cannot be copied. Even when you have not stepped into your strongest version, that frequency still exists. It is always there as the foundation of who you are. Every time you live authentically, the frequency strengthens. Every time you betray yourself, the frequency weakens but never disappears. The power of your frequency is not in how big or small, strong or soft it is. Its power lies in its authenticity. No need to perform, no need to prove, only to exist as it is. Every choice you make while living from a lower layer takes you off your path, but it cannot destroy this frequency. The true frequency is the only thing left when you drop every role, every expectation, everything you once used to hide your truth. When you begin to live from your true frequency, your life shifts immediately. You no longer try to pull things that are not meant for you. You no longer get entangled in situations that are not right. You begin to attract what matches your real vibration, not through method, not through strategy, through the natural coherence of the field. Reality always reorganizes itself according to the frequency you emit. When that frequency is distorted by fear, reality becomes distorted. When that frequency is true, reality becomes true. This is why someone living authentically in silence can create more impact than someone who tries loudly without truth. The true frequency has penetration. It allows others to feel you before they understand you. It touches them from within, not through words. It shifts the space around you. This is not a miracle. This is the natural mechanism of the field. Everything responds accurately to the frequency you choose to live in, and what makes you uncopyable is exactly that choice. No one can choose for you. No one can live in your place. No one can emit a frequency identical to yours. Only you can do that. When you truly understand this, you no longer seek permission. You do not need anyone to grant you value. You do not need others to tell you you are enough. You have always been enough because your true frequency has never disappeared. It only waited for you to remember. And when you begin remembering, your life begins to change in ways you never imagined. Your uncopyable frequency is the reminder that you did not come here to repeat anyone. You came to express a form of consciousness the universe has never seen before. And your existence in its truest form is the only thing needed for that to become real. There is a phase that most people go through, but very few dare to look at directly. It is the moment you dim your own light to feel safer. No one forces you to shrink, but you do it because you believe that making yourself smaller will make life easier, make love easier, make acceptance easier. This is the miscalibration phase where your true frequency is compressed to match an environment that was never meant for you. You do not do this because you are weak. You do it because you once believed it was the only way to survive. The times you cut off your own emotions because you were afraid of being seen as too sensitive. The moments you stayed silent even when you knew the truth because you feared being seen as difficult. The days you forced a smile even though something inside you was breaking. The times you pretended not to know, not to see, not to hear, just to keep a shallow peace. None of this is personality. It is a defense system formed from the times you were dismissed when your true frequency showed itself. You once allowed others to define your value. They said you were too sensitive, so you became dry. They said you were too deep, so you learned to trivialize your feelings. They said you were unrealistic, so you suffocated your intuition. They said you were dreamy, so you learned to limit your imagination. You did not do this because you wanted to. You did it because you believed your light needed to be reduced so it would not make anyone uncomfortable. You have seen the way people's faces change when you show too much truth. You have felt the discomfort in the air when you say something that everyone knows but no one dares to touch. You have been seen as different simply because you see layers they do not want to acknowledge. And gradually you learn to switch yourself off. Your light does not disappear. It is simply adjusted to a level small enough that no one notices. But no one can live too long in a shrunken state without losing something inside. You begin to feel like you are wearing a shirt that does not belong to you. You feel breathless without knowing why. You feel tired of conversations that never touch what truly matters. You feel drained by constantly monitoring yourself so you are not seen as too different. You try to fit into a world that has no space for you. This is the miscalibration phase, where you live without truly living, where you exist without truly being present, where you believe that making others comfortable was more important than living in alignment with your own essence. This phase is like lowering the volume of a beautiful song simply because those around you are used to noise. You think that silence will make things better. In reality, silence only takes you further away from yourself. Over time, your inner voice becomes thinner until you are not sure whether it is intuition or just a fading wish. But the true frequency never turns off completely. It always waits for a chance to return. Whenever you face a truth that hurts you, whenever you can no longer stand pretending, whenever you refuse to play a role that no longer fits, that is when the true frequency tries to rise to remind you that you were not born to live halfway. The phase in which you dim your own light always comes with emptiness, not because you lack something, but because you are living below your potential. It is the distance between who you are now and who you truly are. That distance is what makes you tired in a way you cannot explain. The exhaustion is not from work, life, or responsibility. It is from using too much energy to keep your own light dimmed. You are fighting against your own nature, and this will always exhaust you. At some point, you realize that shrinking yourself does not make the world easier. It only makes you drift away from yourself. You were not born to dissolve into the crowd. You were born to be a point of light through which others can see themselves. But to do that, you must stop living as the adjusted version. You must stop doing things that make you less yourself. You must stop suppressing your true frequency just to fit into places unworthy of it. The truth is that the people who once made you dim your light never saw you correctly. But that does not matter anymore. What matters is that you realize how many pieces of yourself you have abandoned just to hold on to acceptance that never had real value. When you begin to see this, the miscalibration phase reaches its limit. You can no longer tolerate shrinking yourself. You can no longer tolerate a life that slips out of alignment with your true frequency. You can no longer accept relationships that only exist when you make yourself smaller. You begin to want to return to your original state, to return to your full light. Not to prove anything, but so you can live as you truly are. And in the moment you realize this, the recalibration begins. The field cannot synchronize with a false version. It only synchronizes with truth. When you dare to look at your miscalibration phase, you have already taken half a step out of it. And that half step is enough to change your entire path ahead. The moment when the light begins to return never appears loudly. It does not show up on the days you wait for it. It chooses the most ordinary moments, the moments when you are unguarded, when you are living as if everything is fine, but deep inside, you know it is not true. The light returns through a very small crack in your old structure, a passing thought that makes you stop for a few seconds, a hard-to-explain sensation rising from your chest, an unexpected clarity about what you want or what you can no longer accept. This is the break pattern, the moment when your old system can no longer sustain itself and the true part inside begins to reclaim its place. You do not plan to change in that moment. You are not prepared for it. You simply realize that you no longer have the energy to continue being your old self. Every reason that once held you back suddenly feels light like a thin curtain. The fears that once suffocated you are no longer as sharp. The habits that kept you stuck in the same loop lose their pull. This is not willpower. This is your true frequency rising from underneath, breaking through the shell you put on to make yourself smaller. The break pattern does not unfold in a dramatic moment. It happens in quiet. In the morning when you wake up and feel you do not want to live the old way anymore. In the evening when you sit alone and realize that everything you are enduring no longer carries any meaning. In the moment when you feel a kind of exhaustion that appears not because you are weak, but because you have spent all your strength trying to maintain a version that no longer belongs to you. The light returns, not from the outside. It rises from where you buried it. Every decision you made out of fear, every choice that made you shrink, every moment you stayed silent to keep the peace, every emotion you swallowed to not make anyone uncomfortable, all of that created pressure. And when that pressure can no longer hold, the light rises like the first breath after a door opens. The break pattern is the moment you no longer accept miscalibration. You no longer want to wear a mask. You no longer want to carry what is not yours. You no longer want to live in a space too small for your soul. This is the moment you feel clearly that you need more, deserve more, were designed for more, not more in the material sense, more in the sense of truth. When the light begins to return, your body reacts first. You feel a slight expansion in your chest, a soft warmth in your abdomen, an invisible line pulling you toward a version you forgot you could become. This is not a temporary feeling. This is the language of the field. The field does not use words. The field uses vibration. And when your vibration begins to rise above the old layer, everything inside you changes accordingly. You start looking at your life with uncompromising honesty. The things that once troubled you suddenly become small. The people who once made you doubt yourself suddenly feel distant. The relationships that once seemed important reveal that they only existed when you were not living your truth. Your light begins to illuminate everything, not to judge, but to show you the truth. The truth that you lived too long in a distorted version because you believed it was easier to accept. The truth that you left too many pieces of yourself along the way trying to fit others. The truth that you sacrificed the vastness of your soul just to hold on to a space that no longer belongs to you. The break pattern does not destroy you. It only destroys the shell that does not fit. When the light returns, you no longer ask whether you are enough. You ask something else. Why did I ever think I was not? That is when you touch the essence that lay beneath all your fears. You realize that shrinking yourself was never your nature. It was a survival strategy. But at some point, that strategy becomes a prison. And your light is the key. When you begin to see these truths, the change in you becomes irreversible. You cannot return to your old self. You cannot put the mask back on. You cannot return to the compromises that once made you lose yourself. You cannot enter conversations that no longer touch anything real. You cannot stay in spaces that require you to lower the volume of your soul. This is the moment you stand between two layers of reality. One familiar but depleted. One new opening like a door barely cracked. You can feel that beam of light, even if it is faint. But one ray of light is enough for you to know that your true self is beginning to return. This is the moment you must choose. No one chooses for you. No one brings truth to you. No one lifts you out of the old layer. Everything begins from the moment you dare to look at that light and admit you are ready to stop living in the shadow. Your light does not need permission to return. It only needs space. If this story is hitting something deep inside you, if you are feeling even the slightest movement within yourself, Let your heart respond to it in the lightest way. Just one touch on the light button is enough for me to know that the light in you is truly returning and that you have seen yourself in these lines. The awakening of the observer does not happen when you learn something new, but when you see the old with completely different eyes. This is the moment you realize that all this time you have not truly been living, but merely reacting to life like a current with no direction. You believed you were choosing, but in truth, you were only coping. You believed you were moving forward, but you were actually being pushed. Awakening begins when you realize that everything you call fate is only the result of your inner state. When you live in a low vibration, you unconsciously allow the world to shape you. When your frequency rises, you begin to see that the things that once manipulated you no longer hold power. This is when the observer within opens their eyes. The observer does not judge, does not react, does not chase after immediate emotions. The observer stands at the central point where everything becomes clear, like light shining onto still water. You see your thoughts as passing movements. You see emotions as waves, not storms. You see interactions around you as reflections of different frequencies colliding. And most importantly, you see yourself standing in the middle of all of it as an unmoving point that you had never truly recognized before. When the observer opens their eyes, the events of life no longer sweep you away. You no longer dissolve into the story. You stand apart from the story and see how everything operates. A word that hurts you does not break you as before because you clearly see that it comes from another wounded system, not from the truth of who you are. A stressful situation no longer lowers your frequency because you see it as the field testing your inner stability. A distance, a silence, a departure no longer makes you lose direction because you understand that the field always clears what is no longer aligned with the layer you are preparing to enter. When you reclaim the role of the observer, you step out of the state of being pulled by reactions and move into the state of consciously choosing responses. The difference between reaction and response is the foundation of every change in your life. Reaction is unconsciousness, old programming, habit, fear, protection. Response is awareness, choice, clarity, freedom. The observer always chooses response, not reaction. The moment you live from this position, you understand something you once heard but never touched at its root. You are the one collapsing reality. Every thought you hold long enough becomes an energy form. Every emotion repeated becomes a program. Every belief you accept as truth becomes the structure of the world you live in. When you are unconscious, you think reality comes first and then you react. But when the observer opens their eyes, you see the truth reversed. Consciousness comes first. Reality comes after. What you believe is projected into the world. What you fear creates circumstances. What you choose to see becomes the only thing you can see. When you understand this, not through thought but through experience, you begin to live differently. You no longer ask why something happened to you. You ask what frequency you were in that allowed it to appear. You no longer ask why others behave a certain way. You ask what within you allowed that vibration to exist. You no longer try to fix them. You only adjust your own state. And when your inner world changes, reality automatically reorganizes itself. This is when you realize the true power of the observer. Not controlling others, not changing the world, but changing the way you interact with everything. As long as you hold your frequency steady, what does not match you falls away. As long as you see with true eyes, illusions dissolve. As long as you stand firm in your truth, the field restructures itself into a new formation. When the observer awakens within you, you begin to notice that you are walking inside a soft reality, not a fixed one as you once believed. The space around you responds to your vibration. The opportunities you perceive appear according to the awareness you carry. The paths you thought were closed open when you shift your state. The answers you once searched for outside emerge from within. This is not magic. This is the quantum mechanism of consciousness influencing matter. And you are the intersection between the two. When you look at life from the role of the observer, you no longer try to control. You simply hold the frequency. You do not try to change others. You simply stand in truth. You do not chase after everything. You let things choose you when they match your vibration. This ease is not passive. It is the highest form of intentionality. It is not that you are standing still. You are standing in the right place. And that is what makes reality move around you instead of you chasing after it. The awakening of the observer does not make you cold. It makes you clear. It shows you that no one has the power to dim your light unless you hand it to them. No one has the power to define your value unless you forget your own origin. And no one can make you lose your way if you continue to look from the position of awareness instead of the position of being swept away. This is the threshold between the new frequency and your true self, the point where you begin to live not as a reaction, but as someone shaping reality through presence. And from this moment on, you will never return to the old way of living again. The frequency shift begins the moment you no longer accept living at the vibration level you have stayed in for many years. It happens quietly but powerfully, like a new layer of air slipping into the familiar movements of your mind. This change does not come from explosive determination or grand declarations. It comes from a very calm knowing where you look at your life and realize that everything misaligned with your true self has started to fall away. When the true frequency rises, you do not need to try to become someone else. You only need to stop fighting yourself. That is when you clearly feel something important, that you have been broadcasting far too low for far too long just to maintain a false sense of stability. You once kept your voice soft so you would not disturb anyone. You once adjusted every emotion so no one would see you as too sensitive. You once blended into conversations that never reflected your real inner world. You once accepted relationships that did not deserve the depth you carry. When the true frequency rises, none of that can be maintained anymore. You feel in every cell that you cannot live below your nature. Every pretense becomes heavy. Every compromise becomes uncomfortable. Every shallow connection becomes empty. This is the sign of the shift. You no longer want to say things that are not true. No longer want to stay in places that pull you away from your soul. No longer want to maintain relationships that exist only when you shrink yourself. When the frequency rises, you begin to feel life in a completely different way. The things that once frightened you no longer have much power. The thoughts that once weighed you down become only faint echoes. The limits that once looked solid become fragile. Not because you became stronger, but because you became more aligned with yourself. Every fear arises when you are incomplete. When you are out of alignment with your being, everything is heavy. When you return to your true frequency, everything becomes lighter. This is not a temporary feeling. This is the biology of energy. When you live according to your truth, the nervous system softens. When you live at your true frequency, your heartbeat steadies. When you live in truth, your body relaxes. This is not mystical spirituality. It is the natural mechanism of a human aligned with their true frequency. The frequency shift changes how you interact with the external world. You begin to hear more clearly the small voice within. You become more sensitive to anything that is not right for you. You begin to pull yourself away from conversations that do not touch your soul. You begin to distinguish between true desire and desire born from lack. This is the moment you stop living from the wounded self and begin living from the self that is returning. When the true frequency rises, you do not only change internally, you change in the way you appear in the world. Your eyes become deeper, Your voice becomes steadier. Your presence becomes clearer. You enter spaces with a gentle directness that cannot be ignored. You do not try to impress, but you become impossible to overlook. The right people will sense you immediately. The ones who do not belong will naturally drift away like two magnetic fields that cannot connect. No conflict needed, no explanation needed, no effort to keep or push anyone away. The field does that naturally when your frequency changes. When the true frequency rises, reality restructures itself around you in ways you did not expect. Doors that were closed begin to open. Choices that were unclear become obvious. Situations that were complicated become simple. Things that once delayed you disappear from your path. You do not force. You do not beg. You do not chase. You simply hold the right frequency and reality adjusts on its own. This is when you realize life has never betrayed you. It only reflected you. And you have been broadcasting a low frequency for far too long. The frequency shift is not a smooth process. It contains both relief and loss. When you rise in frequency, things that no longer align will fall away. Not because you are not good enough for them, but because you have surpassed the frequency they exist in. Some people will leave. Some relationships will change. Some old dreams will dissolve. But in exchange, you reclaim yourself. You reclaim the voice buried under fear. You reclaim the strength hidden beneath the roles you played. You reclaim the original self untouched by the need for acceptance. This is a shift that cannot be reversed. Once you feel your true frequency, everything else becomes too small. You cannot deceive yourself anymore. You cannot force yourself to live lower than your truth. You cannot pretend not to know. And within this inability to return, you begin to understand the most important thing. Your frequency is not only what you emit, it is what you become. And when you become the truest version of yourself, reality cannot help but respond with matching authenticity. This is the beginning of a new layer of reality, not because the world changed, but because you did. Not because luck appeared, but because your frequency became strong enough to call in what truly belongs to you. And from this moment on, every step you take carries the true vibration you had lost for far too long. Your true self is returning, not through noise, but through precision. The threshold of transition does not appear as a grand sign. It often arrives in a moment that seems completely ordinary. A morning when you wake up and realize that what once felt familiar no longer fits you. An evening when you look at your life and feel a strange silence among the things that used to keep you occupied. A conversation that suddenly feels too shallow. A place that once comforted you suddenly feels tight. A person who once mattered suddenly feels distant. It is not that they changed, you changed. This is the threshold, the point where you begin to feel clearly that you no longer belong to the old layer of reality, but you have not yet fully stepped into the new one. It feels like standing on a bridge between two worlds, where everything behind you is fading and everything ahead is not yet open. There is no way back, and there is not yet a clear way forward. This moment always comes with a very subtle loneliness, not because no one is beside you, but because you are no longer in sync with what once surrounded you. You begin to see everything with the eyes of someone who has gone farther than the life they used to live. The way you feel becomes too real for you to tolerate pretending. The way you think becomes too deep for you to accept what exists only on the surface. The way you see yourself inside becomes too honest for you to continue living under old layers of disguise. The threshold is the point where you have left the old safety but have not yet reached the new safety. This is where the soul is tested most intensely. It tests you with uncertainty, tests you with distance, tests you with silence, tests you with moments of losing direction, not to frighten you, but to see whether you can stand in your truth when everything around you temporarily loses its familiar shape. When you reach this threshold, misaligned relationships begin to fall away. No conflict needed, no explanation needed, just a cooling, a drifting, a subtle separation. People who are connected to your old version cannot keep pace with you when your frequency shifts. You think it is loss. It is actually natural filtration by the field. You think it is your fault. It is actually restructuring. You think you are being abandoned. You are actually being released from the cords that once held you still. At the threshold, you also begin to see the limits of the things that once nourished you. A job that once gave you stability now feels too small. A dream that once mattered can no longer hold the size of your being. An identity you once used to define yourself now feels cramped. This is not disappointment, this is growth. Every layer of reality has a size. And when your soul expands, what once fit can no longer contain you. The threshold is also when fear appears the most. Not the fear of the old, not the fear of the new, but the fear of the in-between, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of not knowing where you are going, the fear that you have broken too much, yet you cannot see what comes next. But it is in this empty space that you learn the most important lesson. You learn to stand steadily through frequency, not circumstance. In the past, you needed the world to be stable, so you could feel stable. Now, you realize true stability comes from within. In the past, you needed others to confirm your worth. Now you realize worth does not come from their gaze. In the past, you needed the old structure to make things feel meaningful. Now it is uncertainty itself that becomes the doorway to a larger reality. The threshold is where your soul checks whether you are honest enough to enter your next version. You cannot bring old illusions into the new layer. You cannot bring old compromises. You cannot bring old fears wrapped in logical explanations. You cannot bring relationships that only exist when you shrink yourself. The new world cannot hold any of that. You have touched the threshold when something inside you speaks very softly but very clearly that you cannot go back. You may pause, you may slow down, but you cannot reverse. Truth once seen cannot be unseen. Light once returned cannot be extinguished. Frequency once risen cannot be lowered to the old level. The threshold is not where you lose your path. It is where you stop running and stand exactly at the boundary between who you were and who you are becoming. This is not an ending, this is a doorway. It opens slowly, but when it becomes clear, you will know that everything you once believed was a limit was only the opening chapter of your life. This threshold is where you begin to choose not based on fear, but based on truth. Not based on what is easy, but on what is right. Not based on what you want to avoid, but on what you are ready to step into. And when you dare to stand at this threshold with full awareness, your inner world shifts first and the external world follows. This is the moment when everything you have gone through finally makes sense. This is where you leave the old version of yourself without regret. This is where you step into yourself. This is where there is no way back. The restructuring of identity happens the moment you realize that what you once believed to be yourself was actually only layers formed by expectations, fears, habits, and roles. The old identity is not the self. It is merely a temporary structure you created to adapt to an environment that no longer fits you. When you reach this stage, you begin to look at your own life as if you are rewatching a film in which you have unconsciously acted for many years, and suddenly you realize that none of the roles truly belong to you. Every old version that once helped you survive has now become a barrier that prevents you from entering a new layer of reality. Realignment is not the process of changing who you are. It is the process of removing what was never you to begin with. You begin to notice the difference between what you do to be accepted and what you do because it is what you truly want. The difference between thoughts you repeat because you fear losing stability and intuitions that rise from the deepest layer of awareness. The difference between the ego built from wounds and the original self that still exists beneath all of it. When your consciousness shifts, the old identity becomes loose. You no longer feel comfortable in the old stories. The reasons that once convinced you to stay suddenly lose their power. The situations that once felt necessary suddenly become meaningless. You begin to see clearly the falseness in the very things you once tried to hold on to, and it is this awareness that opens the realignment stage. You begin to ask yourself questions entirely different from the ones you used to ask. No longer what do I have to do to fit in, but how far am I living from my true self? No longer who must I become to be loved, but which parts of me have I abandoned just to keep someone from leaving? No longer what do I need to feel whole, but what have I lost that made me forget the resources already within me? Realignment always begins with dissolution. The dissolution of beliefs you once considered absolute. The dissolution of roles you once held on to feel valuable. The dissolution of goals you once chased because you thought they would make you feel safe. The dissolution of relationships that only existed when you played a version that was not you. This dissolution makes you feel as if you are losing direction, but in truth you are being returned to your center. The old identity collapses not because you failed. It collapses because it has completed its job. It kept you alive in the old environment, but it cannot take you into the new one. When the foundation of the old identity cracks, the true self begins to appear. You begin to remember the parts you once saw as useless, but were actually your original frequency. Your sensitivity becomes the ability to read the deeper layers of people. Your silence becomes the home of clarity. Your solitude becomes the space of refinement. Your differences become your strength. The things you once tried to hide become the foundation of the new identity. Realignment also brings you into a process of selection. You begin to recognize what belongs to you and what you have kept only out of habit. You see clearly what is a true desire and what is a desire borrowed from society. You distinguish between real connection and connection born from fear of being left behind. You realize that you no longer want to carry anything that is no longer part of you. And letting go becomes easier because you know that keeping the old only makes you heavier when stepping into the new layer. Realignment does not happen in one step. It happens when you repeatedly choose truth, even when truth makes you uncomfortable. When you dare to face the things that once scared you without running away. When you dare to refuse things that are not aligned, even though they once felt like your grounding. When you dare to hold the new frequency even before seeing results. This is the process where stability does not come from the outside, but from a spinal column inside you. A quiet but unshakable alignment. A certainty not built from affirmations, but from awareness. When the new identity begins to form, you feel yourself becoming different in a way that is hard to explain. Not a sudden change, but a subtle shift in the way you enter each moment. You speak less but deeper. You are quieter but clearer. You connect with fewer people but with more authenticity. You move more lightly but with stronger presence. Small things suddenly have meaning. Things that once distracted you suddenly lose appeal. You become a version you have never seen before but feels familiar, as if you are returning home after a long journey where you forgot you had left. The new identity is not something you build, it is something you allow to emerge when you stop holding on to what has expired. And when the true self stands up in place of the roles, your life begins to restructure itself into a new shape, not because you force it to change, but because reality cannot keep its old shape when the person living within it has changed frequency. This is when you look back and understand that every disruption was not punishment, but preparation. Every loss was not losing, but releasing. Every detour was not obstruction, but redirection. And every pain was not an ending, but an invitation back to yourself. Realignment is when you step from a shaped identity into a self-shaped identity. And from that moment on, you no longer live in the story built by others. You live in the story you choose to create. A person who cannot be controlled is not someone who resists everything, but someone who no longer operates from fear. When you reach this stage, you do not become rebellious. You do not become tough in an external way. You become quiet in a way that makes others unable to read you. You become deep in a way that old structures can no longer trap you. The inability to be controlled does not arise from resistance, but from absolute alignment with your true self. When you no longer depend on validation, you become free. When you no longer cling to acceptance, you cannot be manipulated. When you no longer live to please, you are no longer under the emotional power of anyone but yourself. Your danger does not lie in your voice, but in your unshakability. And this state is what makes the old world uncertain about how to handle you. A person who is easy to control is someone tied to the need to be validated, understood, acknowledged, kept close. They are guided by lack, by fear of abandonment, by the desire to belong. But when you move beyond those layers, you step into a rare kind of freedom where you no longer seek your value outside yourself. This is where the true self rises to replace the fragile ego. A person who cannot be controlled is not someone difficult. They are simply someone who no longer hands their power to anyone. They do not allow other people's emotions to dictate who they are. They do not allow someone's approval or disapproval to define their worth. They do not allow old narratives to pull them back to lower frequencies. They are no longer within the system, so the system cannot guide them. When you become such a person, those who are used to controlling you become confused. They no longer know what to say to make you waver. They no longer know what to do to keep you within their safe boundaries. They no longer know where to touch to trigger your old reactions. You become unpredictable. Not because you are erratic, but because you are no longer governed by old programming. They once used disappointment to bind you. Now, it no longer works. They once used silence to make you anxious. Now you see it as soft background noise. They once used praise or criticism to steer you. Now you stand apart from their waves. They once touched the fear inside you. Now that fear is no longer in a place they can reach. The inability to be controlled does not arise from strength rising, but from reclaiming the parts you once gave away. Every time you place someone above yourself, you handed over a piece of your power. Every time you compromised on what you knew was wrong, you handed over a piece of your freedom. Every time you stayed silent when your heart wanted to speak, you handed over a piece of your frequency. Every time you shrank yourself to be loved, you handed over a piece of your light. All these things formed an invisible web that made you easy to control. And when you begin to take each piece back, you return to yourself. A person who cannot be controlled is someone who no longer compromises with pretense. They speak truth not to confront, but to maintain clarity. They walk away from what no longer fits without needing to justify it. They do not keep relationships built on strain. They do not stay in places that make their soul contract. They do not wait for someone to recognize their value before they live according to that value. You become uncontrollable when you realize you do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. What makes you dangerous in the eyes of the old system is not rebellion, but self-authority. The system only works on those who believe they need it to survive. But when you no longer believe that, you step out of the matrix quietly. This is the place where you no longer fear loss. You understand that everything leaves when you hold your true frequency is not yours to begin with. This is the place where you no longer fear loneliness. You understand that loneliness in the old frequency is only preparation for meeting the people who belong to your layer. This is the place where you no longer fear failure. You understand that every collapse is simply part of restructuring. This is the place where you no longer fear being misunderstood. You understand that truth does not need to be seen by everyone. When you live from your true self, you become the still point in a reality that is constantly moving. You do not chase chaos. You do not try to decode others. You do not jump into every emotional wave they create. You hold your clarity like a flame inside, and that clarity is what makes you impossible to control. Others may try to make you doubt, but the knowing within you is louder than their noise. Others may try to distract you, but the alignment within you is clearer than the chaos around you. Others may try to make you bow, but your soul was not designed to live in a reduced version. A person who cannot be controlled is someone who has stepped past the point where fear once governed them. They live by awareness instead of reflex. They choose instead of being pushed. They stand instead of being carried away. They are the one who determines their own frequency and lets the world adjust to it. From the moment you enter this state, you are no longer in the game. You are the one standing outside the game, choosing the role you want to appear in, not from pride, but from awareness, not from rebellion, but from clarity. And that clarity is freedom. This is freedom no one can give and no one can take. This is inner freedom. And once you hold it fully, no one can control you again. A human who cannot be controlled is not someone who resists everything, but someone who no longer operates from fear. When you enter this stage, you do not become rebellious. You do not become hardened on the outside. You become quiet in a way that makes others unable to read you. You become deep in a way that old structures can no longer bind you. The inability to be controlled does not arise from resistance, but from absolute alignment with your true self. When you no longer rely on validation, you become free. When you no longer cling to acceptance, you cannot be manipulated. When you no longer live to please, you are no longer under the emotional authority of anyone but yourself. Your danger does not lie in your voice, but in your unshakability. And this state is what makes the old world unsure of how to handle you. A person who is easy to control is someone tied to the need to be proven, understood, acknowledged, kept close. They are guided by lack, by the fear of abandonment, by the desire to belong. But when you move beyond those layers, you step into a rare freedom where you no longer seek your value outside. This is where the true self rises to replace the fragile ego. A human who cannot be controlled is not someone difficult. They are simply someone who no longer hands their power to anyone. They do not allow the emotions of others to decide who they are. They do not allow others liking or disliking to define their worth. They do not allow old perspectives to pull them back to lower frequencies. They are no longer inside the system, so the system cannot direct them. When you become such a person, those who are used to controlling you become confused. They no longer know what to say to make you waver. They no longer know what to do to keep you within their safe circle. They no longer know where to touch to trigger familiar reactions. You become unpredictable, not because you are unstable, but because you are no longer governed by old programming. They once used disappointment to bind you. Now it has no effect. They once used silence to make you anxious. Now you see it as soft noise. They once used praise or criticism to steer you. Now you stand apart from every wave they send. They once touched the fear inside you. Now that fear is no longer in a place they can reach. The inability to be controlled does not come from rising power. It comes from reclaiming the parts you once gave away. Every time you placed others above yourself, you gave away a piece of your power. Every time you compromised on what you knew was wrong, you gave away a piece of your freedom. Every time you stayed silent when your heart wanted to speak, you gave away a piece of your frequency. Every time you shrank yourself to be loved, you gave away a piece of your light. All of these created an invisible web that made you easy to control. And when you begin to reclaim each piece, you return to yourself. A person who cannot be controlled is someone who no longer compromises with pretending. They speak truth not to confront, but to maintain clarity. They walk away when something no longer fits without needing to give explanations. They do not hold on to relationships built on strain. They do not stay in places that make their soul contract. They do not wait for someone to recognize their worth before living according to that worth. You become uncontrollable when you realize that you do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. What makes you dangerous in the eyes of the old system is not rebellion, but self-authority. The system can only operate on those who believe they need it to survive. But when you stop believing that, you step out of the matrix quietly. This is where you no longer fear loss. You understand that everything that leaves when you hold your true frequency does not belong to you. This is where you no longer fear loneliness. You understand that loneliness in the old frequency is only preparation for meeting those who belong to your layer. This is where you no longer fear failure. You understand that every collapse is simply part of restructuring. This is where you no longer fear being misunderstood. You understand that truth does not need to be seen by everyone. When you live from your true self, you become the still point in a constantly shifting reality. You do not chase chaos. You do not try to decode others. You do not jump into every emotional wave they create. You hold your clarity like a flame within, and that clarity is what makes you impossible to control. Others may try to make you doubt, but the knowing within you is stronger than their noise. Others may try to distract you, but your inner alignment is clearer than the chaos around you. Others may try to make you bow, but your soul was not designed to live in a reduced version. A human who cannot be controlled is someone who has stepped past the point where fear once governed them. They live by awareness instead of reflex. They choose instead of being pushed. They stand instead of drifting. They are the one who determines their own frequency and lets the world adjust to it. From the moment you enter this state, you are no longer inside the game. You are the one standing outside the game, choosing the role you want to appear in, not from pride, but from awareness, not from defiance, but from clarity. And that clarity is freedom. This is freedom no one can give, and no one can take away. This is inner freedom, and once you hold it fully, no one can ever control you again. You are the question the universe asked itself when it wanted to experience its own nature through a form that had never existed before. Everything begins at this point, where infinite consciousness chooses to enter a finite body to explore depths that only a human being can perceive. You did not appear randomly in this timeline. You are not a repeated variation of someone who came before. You are a singular frequency, an intentional configuration, a question the universe condensed into form through your heartbeat, your breath, and your choices. When you view your life not only as a personal journey, but as an experience encoded by a greater intelligence, you begin to understand why some moments cannot be explained by logic. There are times when you feel something calling you from within, even though no one taught you. There are directions you know are correct, even when you cannot give a reason. There are people you meet who feel familiar long before you learn their names. There are events that unfold as if rearranging you according to a structure already written. These are not coincidences, they are the mechanics of a larger question revealing itself. The universe does not ask questions through language. It asks through existence. By creating you, it asks how consciousness will move in this particular form. It asks how light will live when wrapped in skin, memory, and limitation. It asks what love becomes when it must confront fear. It asks what inner wisdom chooses when challenged by the noise of the world. And you are the answer, being written through every decision you make. When you hurt, the universe observes how you turn pain into understanding. When you break, the universe observes how you reassemble your being with new awareness. When you are misunderstood, the universe observes how you hold the truth, not to fight, but to stand in clarity. When you enter darkness, the universe observes how you find light from within, instead of reaching for temporary sources outside. Each time you choose truth over fear, the question is solved one layer deeper. Each time you choose the harder path because it is more authentic, the question becomes clearer. Each time you refuse to compromise with pretending, the question becomes transparent. You are not the one searching for the meaning of life. You are the meaning life is trying to understand. When you realize this, an important shift happens. You stop searching outward. You stop trying to become someone. You no longer force yourself to fit the standards of any system. You begin to see that the true self does not need to be added to, it only needs to be revealed. And your journey is not about finding answers, but allowing the question within you to take shape. When you live authentically, you are not answering only for yourself. You are answering for the field. You broadcast the frequency that the universe embedded in you as a form of message. This is why your presence influences others in ways you do not expect. When you stand in clarity, others see themselves more clearly. When you heal, others feel the possibility of healing. When you dissolve fear, others realize they can too. When you choose to walk from your true self, you are not just writing your answer, but expanding it into the collective. One of the deepest parts of this journey is realizing that you were not born to become someone in the eyes of the world. You were born to show the world a form of consciousness it has never witnessed before. No one before you carried this frequency. No one after you will replicate it. You are not a copy. You are a prototype. Your uniqueness is not decoration. It is a mission. It is how the universe ensures that your experience contributes to the whole. This is why your life never fits rigid structures. You were not designed to live inside them. You were designed to break them, to open pathways for new forms of perception. Your sensitivity is not a flaw, it is an antenna for the question you carry. Your depth is not a burden, it is the channel through which the question finds its clearest answer. The times you stood alone were not failures. They were moments when the universe removed you from the noise so you could hear yourself more clearly, and the upheavals you experienced were not punishments. They were layers of testing to refine the answer you are creating. The universe does not require you to be perfect. It only needs you to be true, because the truth within you is its own voice rising through a form called you. And when you walk into the world from that understanding, you become a presence people feel before they understand. You are not merely a human of personal experiences. You are a representative of a larger question, a higher layer of awareness, a stream of energy the universe is inserting into this timeline. You were not born to blend in, you were born to clarify. And the question never chooses the wrong person. It chose you from the beginning. You are the question the universe asked when it wanted to remember itself through a gaze, a heart, a being that cannot be repeated. And your journey, step by step, choice by choice, is how that answer is being written into time.